So as she started, there are multiple traditions of Christianity, and one question might be, why Platonist Christianity in particular? In fact, you might even problematize that by thinking about Dr. Layne's reference to paradox early in her talk. I don't know about you, but I thought, well, that conversation, that part of her talk sounded strikingly Kierkegaardian to me. Indeed, we might think that Christianity inherently, following its Neoplatonic roots historically, might be essentially syncretistic, that is, drawing from multiple traditions, so that Christianity is inherently Platonic and Aristotelian and Kierkegaardian and Lutheran, etc., 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 right? So I want to try to plumb this idea, not to be pushy, but to ask, in a way, why Platonism in particular, if we're faced with all of these possible traditions to draw from in thinking about what the character of Christianity is. It seems to me Dr. Layne's central thesis with respect to that question is the answer in terms of erotics. A Platonic Christianity is a Christianity of erotics. And I think we can identify several key features of what that erotics involves, drawing from her talk. First, that human eros is characterized or identified as essentially having a move toward the divine. Clearly, especially in the light of the last part of her paper, not understood perhaps in the hierarchical terms that we might traditionally do this, escaping the world to reach the divine, but instead finding the divine present in the world. Sounds strikingly Jesuit, we might even say. So first, a human eros driven toward the divine. Secondly, a human eros, I'm going to use a Freudian term here, sublimated as agape for others. And here perhaps the best way to clarify Dr. Layne's point is to make a contrast with Aristotle, that other great source of synthesis for understanding the nature of Christianity. In an Aristotelian Christianity, as we can see clearly in St. Thomas Aquinas' masterful synthesis, agape is interpreted as philia. So we understand agape, Christian love, in the light of friendship, as Thomas makes clear in the Summa. Agape is friendship with God that leads to a friendship with others. As Dr. Layne pointed out, by contrast, a Platonic Christianity, a Christian Platonism, is going to conceive of agape in erotic terms. There's and you can see how this is linked to the first point about erotics. The erotic desire for the divine leads us to an identification of and discovery of the divine in other human beings. Third is that in an erotics, a Christian erotics, we find a focus on dialogue, and we might draw the comparison or contrast to Aristotelianism, dialogue rather than contemplation. The great image of the peak of philosophical activity in Aristotle, of course, is contemplation, and we find that carried through even in his discussion of friendship. The best activity of friendship certainly is dialogue, but it's dialogue that drives us toward an appreciation for, an admiration of, a contemplation of divine things. And finally, we might say that the fourth element of this Christian erotics is a saintly pursuit of divinization on the pattern of Plato's cave, where the saint is the one who, having seen beauty and truth and been transformed by it, descends once again into the cave in order to awaken and provoke the same search in others. One other element that's related to all this, I was particularly struck by Dr. Layne's phrase that Platonist, a Christian Platonist, is is going to be characterized by an appreciation of the sanctity of the world. That is, the presence of the divine in the world. And I do want to track this question back to a why not Thomas, right? Or why not Aristotelian Christianity? Because it seems that what in a key part I've pointed out in erotics of Christianity, it seems like is going to point us in Platonic direction. But in recognizing the sanctity of the world, it seems that the sort of natural theology that you mentioned at the beginning of your paper, that we find in Plato, certainly, but we perhaps find as central to Aristotelian Christianity, is also important. Perhaps we have a semantic difference here in the question of what is pointing and to what is it pointing. And in Thomas and Aristotle, it's clear that that order and regularity and intelligibility in the world point to the divine, but one could argue that's precisely what's happening in the Timaeus as well. So I'll just take those as remarks. We'll let Dr. Layne respond if you wish, and then we'll proceed to questions.
Okay. Why Platonism versus an Aristotelian seems to be the kind of the weight of that question. And I have many ways I can answer that. I could do the one that would be controversial, which is I don't think Aristotle is not a Platonist, and so I think that there is a kind of harmony between Platonism and Aristotelian philosophy that is often unacknowledged. We don't talk about it. We do a lot of trying to separate the two, and so I think this is certainly a point in contact between Aristotle and Plato. Let's see, how else would I respond to that? I do think that my understanding of eros is deeper in Plato than it would be in Aristotle, simply because I don't think that this is completely vacant or absent from Aristotle in his notion of philia and the importance of loving the other as a mirror to oneself. But I think that the Platonic version of eros is that when I love the other, right, I'm not loving them. Sorry, Ali, you're gonna be my other. I'm not loving the other as a mirror of myself. Right, as just another me. That in the Platonic sense, I'm loving the other qua other. I'm loving them as possibly the worst, everything that's the worst about the world, but still seeing the divine in them, and that even the divine in them in their lowest states, right, in their alcoholism, in their infidelity. Sorry, Valley, you've just become the wretch of the world. That even there, I can see God in them. And that means that in even in her lowliness, in my I too, even in my forsakenness, can discover the God in me. And I think that's just more apparent in Platonism than it is and so that's how I think the world can be saved in a way that really recognizes the terror of existence, the deplorability of existence, the strangeness of the other. Yeah, does that make sense?
There was an attempt at Aristotelian Christianity in the 2nd century in Rome, and it was rejected as heresy. And we know very little about Theodotus, the shoemaker, who was the founder of that school. But what he's criticized for in Eusebius is that he's analytical rather than allegorical in his interpretation of the scripture. He focused on the literal sense rather than the allegorical sense, which I take to mean that he's not mystical at all, and that he's interested in objectivity. He also preached a purely human Christ. And I think, again, it's because he doesn't like the mixture of the human and the divine, because he wants
what
analytical distinctions.
What figure is this again?
Theodotus, the shoemaker, in late 2nd century Rome. So he's a near contemporary of Justin, who was a Platonistic, or he was early Christian philosopher advocating a Platonistic philosophy. Theodotus would have been an Aristotelian advocating for an Aristotelian Christianity. And so historically, the option was there and it wasn't taken. It was rejected. And those are the reasons given in Eusebius for why it was rejected. I know Origen forbid his students from reading Aristotle. And the cliche or the stereotype of Aristotle in the classical world was that he was an atheist because...
Well, he's a kind of naturalist.
Well, because
sure.
he's a naturalist,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And his God is not concerned with the world. You know, we're concerned with God, but God isn't
Right.
even necessarily aware of us. He's thought, thinking, thought. So maybe implicitly us, but not explicitly us. And the idea of an incarnation, I think, would be really hard to square with Aristotle.
Yeah, I think that's all true. I think that that's probably one of the main reasons why.
And he was denied, and he was said to have denied divine providence. But, I mean, everything is attracted toward God, but God doesn't intervene in the world. God is, it's much more of a deistic God.
Pure actuality and everything else
Yeah.
striving toward it.
So, I mean, so that's the way Aristotle was taken in the early, in the Roman Empire. That's the way he was commonly understood. Now, the Arabs make him religious, and Aristotle baptizes him. But that takes a lot of work.
Do you think we could open up to students? Any students?
So I have a few questions just out of like personal curiosity for how you kind of mesh these things. In regards to the Timaeus, there's some sort of like meta dialogue within it about physics as a likely story and any kind of explanations of the cosmos as a likely story. So I'm curious like how you can, like how you sort of combine that with like a Christian understanding of the cosmos.
Okay, yeah, so I tend to, this is actually the heart of one of the tensions in my life, is because it's the eikos mythos of the Timaeus really brings to the fore the importance to me of the reasonableness of the cosmos. So the eikos can be translated as likely, as reasonable, as fitting or appropriate. I would like to understand that Plato is taking all of the best physical theories of the time and putting it together to tell a narrative of the coming into being of the world. And I find it to be a very fascinating story that inspires my faith because it really wants to emphasize the reasonableness. And because I think if Plato were alive today, he would be fashioning the most reasonable or appropriate stories about the physical world into a new mythos, or adapting it or showing how contemporary physical theories would relate to his old story, right? The point being is that I often am drawn more to this creation story than, say, Genesis, right? And so that and not to say that the Genesis is not appropriate or fitting or reasonable, but yeah, this is where my Platonism shines through, is that I find the story of the demiurge and the creation of the world from Platonic solids to be more of what fires my faith. So yeah, I just have to be honest there. It makes more sense to me that creation is not from out of nothing, and that it is eternal. But then I am showing my Platonism cards rather than my Christian cards.
You're also showing your Jewish cards.
Possibly, I don't know. Yeah.
Judaism does not have a doctrine of creation ex nihilo.
Right.
In fact, if you translate the very first phrase of Genesis, when God set about to shape the heavens and the earth,
Right.
there's a void there.
Yeah, that's right. Chaos.
There's a chaos.
Yeah.
So you're just being Jewish.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, this is part of the wonderful thing about late Platonism is that all of these things seem set in stone, that we can't, these are things that we have to believe. And for centuries within Christianity and Platonism, there were debates about whether or not we should believe these things. It was part of being a Christian, was to be asking these questions. Is it reasonable to believe in creation ex nihilo, even the eternity or temporality of the world? And so this is, I've not settled, right? I don't think that I'm going to say I have the final answer on these things, but these are questions that I let my faith engage, and that when I don't answer it the right way, I don't tell myself I'm less of a Christian or less of a Platonist. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense to me.
Thanks, Dr. Layne, for your paper. I thought it was very brave and interesting. Could you connect it to something that I recall you saying in your job talk?
I don't know. I was gonna make up the abdominal line, all right?
No, it was your research presentation for your job talk, and I've always, I look back at it, but my memory is a little bit fuzzy, so something you just could refresh my memory and connect what you're saying here to what you're saying there. My recollection was trying to present philosophy from your own Platonic, Neoplatonic sort of view, and I don't want to use a word incorrectly, like it wasn't as religion or faith or observation. It was some sort of like anyway, you could present your own view, but as a philosopher,
In terms of prayer, is that what you're
prayer,
referring
that's
to?
probably the word I'm looking for,
Yeah.
which seems rather obvious now. But not in the traditional sense, right? You can remind or let people know. But does it seem appropriate to connect those two?
So yeah, so
strands
if
here?
you know my work on Platonic prayer, pagan prayer, you would know that my talk tonight was a prayer, right? The work of doing philosophy, right, of asking these questions is to comport oneself in such a way that you, in fact, you think through and put yourself in communion or relationship with the divine, right? So that everything I do is to become like the divine, and that God creates and creates. So, all right, I'll slow down. Okay. The demiurge, right? The Platonic demiurge is a God that loves and creates, and human beings resemble the divine in our creative capacity. And how is it that we create? Well, we create and resemble the divine through one's intellect, right? And so when you write a philosophy paper or you write a philosophy talk, and you give it in order to think about the nature of the divine, the nature of virtue, you do the creative work of being human, and therein mirror divine love. And so that here, trying to talk through my understanding of my faith is in fact an attempt to create or to mirror the divine, i.e. to pray to the divine or to have communion with the divine.
So in a way, it sounds like you're saying the way you bring them together, I mean, another way of accounting for the way you bring them together is in that of doing philosophy in that particular way.
So that philosophy, when we do it as objective, as scholastic, as in ways that aren't dangerous, right? That I'm up here and I'm reading my paper and I'm not revealing anything about any of my personal views. I'm not doing the work. I'm not resembling the divine that emanates, touches us, graces us, that is both intellect and body, right? So that you can't just be a talking head or a mindless mind up here reciting words, but that there's something at stake, your identity, in much the same way that God puts himself at stake. Once again, yeah.
I thought it was really interesting that you talked about Platonism as validating the material and validating the physical, because I have like philosophy 101 knowledge of Platon styles, so context. But the stereotype of Platonism that I've always run into is focusing on the immaterial to the point of being anti-material, and that's always kind of one of the beefs that I've had, because I feel like Jewish tradition and Orthodox tradition are much more validating of the physical, and that's one of the reasons I've sort of pushed Platonism away, or I haven't been as interested in it. And so, why are those parts of those dialogues that you reference as validating the material world, why are those lost?
Oh, there's so many ways I can answer that question, so I'll see what I can do. First off, you're right. If you're going to take human nature, you're going to hear the typical two-world theory of Platonism that says, and it's going to emphasize the Phaedo and the disparagement of the body, of wanting to escape the prison that is the body for the sake of the transcendent. But upon closer reading, when you really invest yourself in the dialogues, you see that there's a much more enriched understanding that the first love is the body. The body and love of the beautiful body is going to inspire us to ascend all the way to love of beauty and the good itself. I think it's important that in your first introduction to Plato that you actually get that separate, right, that two-world Plato, so that you could just first start thinking about the nature of the distinction between intelligible and sensible. So I don't think anything wrong is happening when you learn that. And I think Plato, in fact, writes his dialogues to be pedagogical, right, so that we kind of enter into Platonism with that two-world theory in mind, and that we slowly begin to let that theory implode a bit as we let ourselves read the dialogues more closely and understand what's happening here. Now, I'm saying that because I want to say this is what Nietzsche did. This is what Nietzsche thought Christianity and Platonism were doing. They were both doing that. They were both disparaging the world. They were both life-denying for the sake of some other world. And this is where, even though I think Nietzsche is an astute reader of both Christianity and Platonism, unfortunately, this is where he gets it wrong, right? So that there is a similarity between Christianity and Platonism, but it's not in their denial or their life-denying sense, but in fact, they both are salvific of the world, or see the world as the beginning point or the entry point for seeing the paradox of what it means to exist as a human being, as being soul that is both transcendent and also connected to the finite. In ways, so now getting back to Platonism, in ways that's important, the erotic aspect is stressed in dialogues like the Symposium, the Phaedrus, the Alcibiades I, the Timaeus. These are all texts that I invite you, if you want to really see the connection between, or the importance of the relationship between the transcendent and the particular or the finite. I would say it's in all the dialogues, but those are pretty much the best representatives. Now, repeat your question one more time, because there was something else I wanted to say, and you saying your question again will remind me what it was.
Oh man, there's an aspect that you missed. I don't know what it was.
Oh.
Well, I was just asking, sort of, because it seems like, in my experience, every ideology has a proclivity, and so like something it devolves into most easily, and so that was really the thrust of the question.
Okay.
Why?
So why, you asked, I think correct me if I'm wrong, you also asked me why is it that we stress this history of the distinction between sensible and the intelligible, this two world, when it's a much more nuanced or complex reading of Plato. And I actually it has to do a lot with the appropriation of Platonism into Christianity as well, because there is in some sense that where Christians needed to distance themselves from Platonism, and so as to emphasize, look, Platonism is making this cutoff, right? And so that became part and parcel, because you have to remember that the Christians were converting Hellenistically educated elites, right? Aristocrats, and one of the ways to convert the elites is to emphasize, but we here do this better, right? We're better at seeing the sanctity of the world. Look at the threat in Platonism. It is this two world. And so there was a real sense, a historical sense, that Christians were invested in trying to show that Christianity creates this rift as well. So, and then in response, the pagan Platonic philosophers would double down and start writing more clearly about their connectedness to the world. So,
I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the role that Nietzsche has in your whole development here, because it strikes me as puzzling for at least 3 reasons.
Okay, hold on.
It's not just that Nietzsche has disdain for the transcendent, because he does, but he also wants to deny that in the cosmic order there is an order, right? That it's not orderly, it's chaotic.
Right.
And then thirdly, his notion, he wants to deflate the traditional philosophical conception of reason He thinks that reason has been overestimated in terms of its importance, in terms of its centrality within human life. It is one among many drives that we have. So he doesn't seem to be a likely, what's the word I'm looking for, interlocutor
Yeah.
in your whole development here. So I was wondering if you could perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, he's so he's my one of my great debate partners. So what I think is really important is that we are actually tempted, right? So Nietzsche is a temptation of mine, right? So when I describe myself, when I pre-conversion, being converted to both Platonism and Christianity, I probably would have been a Nietzschean, right? I would have seen reason as a fiction, as an illusion. I would have recognized or thought of everybody as always acting on the basis of self-interest, and that really what was true of the world is meaninglessness, absurdity, and despair. And so this is a part of me that still exists today. There's still a very Nietzschean aspect to my character, because the reason why I ended on God, why have you forsaken me, right, is because I think that this is what it means to go into despair or to fall into the abyss. Okay, that we see chaos and not beauty, that we see meaninglessness and not meaning, that we see suffering and we say, right, that is doesn't matter, right? That's just the way it is, and so that. I think it's important that we recognize that that's a real draw in the human being. That's the reason why Nietzsche is such an important person in my philosophical thinking, is that he really shows the seductiveness of this way of living in the world, and that at the end of the day, we can all become Nietzscheans, we can all become nihilists, we can all slip into the despair of this being away from God, of seeing reason and God as fictions and illusions, and so yeah, this is so basically I'm saying that Nietzsche is a great sinner. No? And that this is, because that's what I want to say, that this is what it means to be forsaken, is to see and to validate meaninglessness over meaning, and that Platonism and Christianity, in some sense, are the what help us to convert and to reorient ourselves back into the world as revelatory of meaning and beauty. So, did that answer your question at all?
No. Yes.
Yeah, Sam.
Well, I just wanted to ask about the good beyond being.
Yeah.
I guess so. This is something that for all of my sympathies for all of the Platonic ideas, like this is something that still makes me nervous, because I'm pretty keen to avoid saying that the world is good because of the good beyond, because of something external. You know what I mean?
Say that last sentence.
Because of something external to it. So like we would say, well, the nature is good because of the good beyond being.
Right.
Right. I'd rather find some way to be able to articulate that nature just is good because it itself is good, right? So do you think, I guess, does that make sense as a question?
No, you're afraid to make the good too transcendent, right?
Yes,
And yeah, that's I think both Platonism and Christianity can slip into that possibility, in which, but I think that would be, I think this is where the late anti-Platonists or the Neoplatonists are better about emphasizing that everything is going to reflect the good, right? And that the good beyond being, right, while it's not a being, right, is what constitutes or makes possible being, life, soul, everything, right? It is the primary first principle or cause that makes everything insofar as anything makes sense or anything is intelligible, anything that bees is due to the good beyond. So it's not a good that is